Hello everyone, you're welcome to the first live edition of John Walter's Unchained on YouTube. We're going to be doing this pretty frequently, I think, into the future, where we will have guests on live. We will take questions from the audience, and we'll hopefully do something that will have an impact on the way things are in our country, in Ireland, and in the world. We are based in Ireland, and in that sense we are, to some extent, fixated with Ireland because that's the particular place we're in. But unfortunately, Ireland has become something of an emblem of the present time, in that it is being targeted in a particular way, which is, I think, very instructive for other countries. And in that sense, it's more than just simply a local parochial matter. When something, for example, like the Burke saga erupts, it becomes emblematic of a much broader tapestry, and I think we'll be reflecting that in a way that perhaps in other countries the same isn't necessarily true. Ireland being what it is, an ancient land of the spirit and of culture, of music, of literature, and so on, is an easy target, or is an obvious target for people who want to destroy all of those things. And that's part of what we see as our mission on John Walter's Unchained. Tonight I'll have, I think, 4 guests, 3 or 4 anyway, I can't remember. I feel a bit like first morning I went serving Mass as an altar boy, because there's so much to remember here, and I can't read my notes because I forgot my glasses, that kind of way, And so, if I drop the tour bell or something like that now, you'll have to forgive me. But we have some very good, very interesting guests tonight, some very interesting topics. We're talking about global affairs, we'll be talking about local spiritual affairs, we'll be talking about local corruption and other things. And also we'll be taking questions from people who want to send them in. We'll obviously be sifting them. We'll be limited to the extent that we can answer questions, but we'll answer as many as we can. Myself, or indeed, if you want to target one of my guests and they're still here, feel free. My first guest is a very well-known person to, I think, these audiences. It's James Conway. He's a farmer, he's a podcaster, he's a builder, he's many things. He's a sometime politician like myself, not a very good one, no more than myself, but he's not a very successful one, I mean. But he's coming here tonight. We're going to talk about the global situation and heading for some kind of, I would say, catharsis or something along those lines with the events in Iran and other aspects, other things that are due to happen and perhaps more imminent than we think. So welcome to James.
Hello, John.
How are you doing, James?
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. Myself and James have done already this week, I think, quite a good interview, if I may say so, down on his farm in Dunmore West. And that'll be going out sometime maybe later this week. That touches, it's about, no, it's hard to say what it's about, James, isn't it? It's not about farming as such. It's about the things that farming is about. It's about reality. It's about existence. It's about survival. It's about good common sense and all those things. Isn't that right?
Well, I think you touched on the point several times over the years, is what's been created is a pseudo reality, and I think by farming it brings you back to physical reality in every essence, because you have to be aware of what's going on with you. But from my end of it, it's a preparedness exercise. We've all read the 1990s UN documents, and it's beginning to be fairly clear that there weren't so much predictions as it's a categorical plan at this stage, and they're just playing out the plan.
One of the things I felt to doing it, James, is that it was a kind of a miraculous kind of engagement, because we felt completely free to go wherever we wanted, and we did. So that the issues are kind of broadened out into all kinds of spectrums like that we didn't necessarily plan or dream up ourselves. It just kind of happened. And I think people will find it really interesting. I think it goes to the very heart of what this almost here, let's say, that moment of literally survival, which I think is imminent because of the other stuff we're talking about now, which is, Iran, Trump, all that stuff. Like, I mean, what James, do you think of? Like, what is Donald Trump about? Was there ever anything to him other than nonsense?
In his first round, he hadn't got funding from a particular part of the world, but in this more recent election, if one looks at the Joe Biden election, it's very clear that there was manipulation. And I think Donald could basically see that, listen, if you're not playing ball, you won't be president again. He was always a con man and has been a very successful one for decades. If one goes back to the 90s periods and talks to anyone who worked for him in New York or that, it was, he was known as a subby buster. He'd get the vast majority of politicians are puppets. They're bought and paid for. And I think we were all hoping, and some of the stuff he done was very good.
Yes.
The pushback against woke and all of these nonsensical ideas was good. But the truth of the matter was that was to give you just the grain of hope.
Well, exactly. That was the way of kind of, papering over what he was really about.
Yes.
Because those are not, in the great scheme of things, those are details. They're not central. I mean, they're very annoying things and so on, and very, in their own way, very important, like the trans thing or whatever. But at the end of the day, they're not. What's going to happen next is far, it's on a different scale, isn't it?
No, and if you read the Soviet books years ago about demoralization of other societies and that, what they were doing was actually making very, very large talking points about very small issues. So transgenderism, as much as it might annoy you, affects a very, very, very tiny proportion of the population.
Yes.
So if someone looks at it and they busy the people with nonsensical issues, then they can prepare for things like the attack we've just seen in Iran. Now, this is going to trigger a hyperinflation.
Yes. That's
my personal opinion.
So like, you could actually imagine that this was kind of factored into the plan for all along, that we have all this additional padding stuff, the woke stuff, etc.
Yes.
And this will actually make it so that somebody like Trump can then appear to be delivering on his promises to a high degree, while in fact he's going in the opposite direction.
You see, there's particular parts of history at any moment in the present you can go back and draw parallels. The frightening parallel this week is the fall of Soviet Russia. Europe has created a technocratic welfare state.
Yes.
And now the oil and gas is shut off.
Yes.
And we've regulated all of our industries to such a point that we are totally not. So I done an interesting little thought experiment today. I was speaking to Tommy earlier about it. I was in my local village, and there's 2 staff members, electricity, refrigeration, all going on, all costs that are going to go through the roof. 2 customers in 1 hour went through the doors. One bought a box of cigarettes, so I presume there's probably €1 profit on the box of cigarettes. And then someone came out with a litre of milk. So maybe €1.20 of profit in that hour, 2 staff members. So what's about to occur is all of these smaller businesses that were really strangled anyways are about to go under, and very quickly. Yes. This is not going to be an elongated crisis. It's going to be very, very hard and quick. And what people are going to realise is that there's no jobs to go back to. I don't think, the diesel price headed over €2 today.
Yes,
that's heading for 2.20, 2.50.
Yeah.
So let's take a product like chicken, and we have an example of it on my place. 3 weeks and 3 days of incubation, which is electricity. Then 4 weeks of heat lamps to mimic the hen. The chicken that people are currently paying €6 and €7 for will be €30 between a month.
Yes.
This is the trigger. A shed filled with vegetables, potatoes, carrots, whatever it is now, that's in a refrigeration unit. The product that you're refrigerating, it won't actually be worth their while refrigerating it.
Yes.
This is. I remember having a fantastic evening with yourself. You had a meeting in Sligo one time. Do you know? They used to be very good meetings. And do you remember the evening that I brought up Marx?
Yes.
And I was absolutely attacked
I do,
for
yeah.
talking about Karl Marx. And I says, I know he didn't offer great solutions, but by God, he done a very good criticism. This is what happens. Capitalism always has this cycle, which is
Yes.
it allows the accumulation, and now it all has to fall apart. And you see, Trump, in my book, is protecting himself and his family from the falling apart, from the unravelling. They'll be well invested. They'll see the next side. The vast majority of the working public are about to lose everything. And the psychology of this is, if you've built your entire life outlook around your work and your social position, you're finished. And very rapidly.
You see, James, I feel like a sucker because I have always argued, or I don't know if you would call it an argument as such, it was a position I was taking, and it seemed to me to be true and obvious, that Donald Trump, whatever his flaws, and he had many, as we all have, but that it didn't seem to be that he would betray the people who had placed their trust in him.
Yes, but it's not so much Trump, it's the position that he's in. The dollar is the most overprinted currency in history. You cannot prevent it from going under.
No.
So the way he's behaving at the moment would indicate to me that he is going to allow Europe to burn. He's taken Venezuela. He's assured his own oil supply. The war is not on his doorstep. It's this is one of the things the Americans say, a faraway war. It's far away from the shores of America.
Yes.
If they can reboot,
Unless
currency,
other parties get involved.
this is it. But in my mind, like this was all very easily predicted. If you print 75% of the currency that's ever been in existence in a 2-year period, we know what happened to Zimbabwe, we know what happened to Argentina or Weimar Germany. This all leads to hyperinflation. They were able to do this remarkable thing after COVID where the governments came in and printed another bit to kind of, when they helped the ordinary person with their electric bill and stuff like that.
Yeah.
They're no longer in that position.
Yes.
It's not going to be achievable. Like, we have politicians in Ireland now who are crying to get rid of the carbon tax on the fuel. It should never have been on the fuel. But our government are not in a position to get rid of it. They know that they are teetering on the point of bankruptcy. Most European countries and most countries around the world are.
But all these governments have surrendered their independence anyway, so they don't have any autonomy in relation to any policy, really, at this stage.
No, but and even the comment there, we were unsuccessful politicians. My God, we should be praying every night and thanking God that we were. I don't think a lot of these politicians realise how close they are to being lynched. Because you're dealing with a public that doesn't understand any of this.
No.
They're not going to understand why fuel goes to €3 and €4. They're not going to understand why you brought in masses of people from other countries when you had no money.
But James, and that is for a very simple and clear reason, and one reason only. It is the corruption of my former profession, the media.
Yes.
Which refuses to tell people anything that is of relevance to their lives.
Yes. And again, I draw the analogy of the fall of Soviet Russia. At the very end, when Soviet Russia was falling apart, they put on Swan Lake. Let's all watch a ballet. Let's pretend, please, for the love of God, pretend that things are going all right.
Yes.
But again, what happened with the Soviet Union, the fall of it? Your oligarchs and your black market develops very rapidly. People need to eat. So the Russian mafia in Moscow would simply set the price for bread, and they would simply set who could buy it. And this is the danger. Ireland is such a weak society at the moment that any of these new groups who have came in that are privy to the use of violence, that don't worry about it, will be able to very rapidly take over the black market.
Well, they're taking over all that kind of thing anyway. Do you see this escalating into a global war?
Yes. I think it would be very foolhardy of Putin and Xi not to take advantage of a war that's clearly not going well. And it's so, like the Western media, it's actually depressing to look at the moment. They're not reporting on how badly it's going.
And a war that is incrementally disarming all of their potential opponents, all of their enemies.
Yes.
Because they're wasting all of their firepower.
Well, the Foreign Affairs Minister for Iran was interviewed the other evening by an American station. Very interesting interview, because he seemed like a very level-headed... He wasn't your kind of roaring, pelting, what they like to depict of the Arab nation. And he just simply said, we can't negotiate with you. We negotiated twice. You attacked us both times. Both times when we were negotiating, you attacked us. We don't trust you anymore. And the American commentator goes, but this could lead to American troops on the ground. And he goes, yes, we're ready.
But it's extraordinary when you think about Trump, the way he was mouthing about being able to settle the Ukraine war in a day, and that he'd have a special relationship with Putin, and that was all going to be OXO. Like, the direct opposite is now happening.
It is, but I think a lot of people were caught up in the hope that it could be solved. The vast majority of wars cannot be prevented. It's a frightening thing. I know everyone likes the idea of we'll all get a guitar and sing Kumbaya and we'll all get along with each other, but the truth, most wars are fought over geography, access to resources, importance on a geopolitical scale.
But I appreciate that, James, but I mean, it seemed that Trump understood that the basis of the Ukraine war was completely spurious to begin with from the Western NATO point of view, and that Putin had only done what he had to do in order to defend his own people in the Donbass and to defend his borders,
yes,
as he said he would in advance many times.
Yes, but you see, what Trump said is what people wanted to hear. They wanted to hear that this could be prevented. The truth of the matter is the Ukraine war is a laundering operation. Yes. It's to launder the ill-gotten gains of the Western world.
Yes.
Putin felt that his territory was being encroached upon and that the NATO was pushing too far. This war couldn't be stopped in a day, because any reasonable person would look at Putin and say, well, why on earth is he going to stop? And we, as, in our community, a lot of people, well, I like Putin and all that. I think Putin is a strong character in that, but he has robbed his country blind. He's an oligarch in himself.
Yes. Yes.
This is the part that a lot of people on our side don't want to mention.
No, he's not saying.
None of these are nice people.
No.
And you see, I do have this conversation with a lot of people, and I like Trump, but I don't like any of them. They're all very unpleasant characters.
Well,
if you read Machiavelli.
Yeah, in a certain sense they have to be, haven't they? I mean, if you could imagine a nice person, I mean, who was the last nice president of, like Jimmy Carter was probably a nice guy, but he was completely ineffectual, useless.
Yes, but you see, I do not see how this de-escalates.
Yeah.
And this is the bit, like, what hope have we for de-escalation? You have Iran, who've just had their Pope blown up.
Yes.
And in the first
and
day
his wife.
And in the first day of the war, a national school filled with little schoolgirls, they blew that up. So how do you turn to the Iranian people now and say, listen, I know they've killed our religious leader. I know they've killed our little girls. But let's talk to them for a while. You can't.
No.
This doesn't de-escalate.
No.
This finishes, in my opinion, approximately 10 to 12 days when the stocks from Israel and America are well depleted and NATO is terminally dragged in towards the Middle East. You'll see a two-front operation starting where I imagine China will go for Taiwan and Russia will keep going west. Why wouldn't that? So it's perfectly logical.
Yes, because I remember actually at the start of the Ukraine war, everybody was getting fuel, stockpiling fuel and all the rest of it. It didn't really come to that. Now it is coming to that.
Yes. Yeah.
Thanks, James. We'll talk again soon. Thank you. My next guest is Tracy Dawn, who's a journalist on Substack. Her Substack page is called Tracy's Newsletter, and she's been, in the recent past, she's been doing an extraordinary series of articles about Ireland and about what's actually happening to Ireland. And by that I mean what's happening in a certain context, what's happening almost as the culmination of what has been happening to Ireland for the last, God knows how many years, maybe even 100 years, whereby the powerful, the political parties, which are really just corporations, really, have been carving up the resources of this country, filling their pockets, filling the pockets of their friends. This has now reached a stage which is actually, it's now the terminal stage in my view, I think. And Tracy's articles very much reflect that sense that this is a mission to plunder the last remnants of Ireland's wealth and beyond that its culture, beyond that its history, beyond wiping Ireland out as a nation, as a culture, and turning it into basically a barren rock coming up out of the Atlantic, which is a place where economic activity happens for the benefit of the already wealthy. So I'm very pleased to welcome Tracy Dawn.
Hi, John.
How you doing, Tracy? Nice to see you again.
You too. Thanks for having us.
You're very welcome. The articles you've been writing are really, really interesting. They remind me a little bit of stuff I used to do years ago, but I was working in a certain sense, from the other side of the process, in the sense that I was writing about, the state of Irish water, for example, way back in the early 90s, the pollution of the effect of agricultural runoff and pharmaceutical industries on the watercourse and so on. And also things like the railway system being run down. But what you're describing in these articles, and I'm thinking in particular of two recent ones. One is about Irish forestry, and the other is about the health services. There's really a kind of it's an orchestrated assault,
yeah,
on aspects of Irish, the most essential, things like forestry, which is like to build houses, to firewood, and so on. So tell us what's happened. And I was very taken by the thing, something which I didn't know, that you say at the beginning of that article, that the last thing that the British did on the party was they basically took away all our forests.
Yeah, that's right. So when Dennis Mahon was shot in Strokestown, I think it was 1847, 1848. It kind of started a retreat with landlords going home, but they made sure that they took the trees as the last kind of insult they could, to give to the Irish. And I think that's why this was common knowledge. I know a lot of people knew about what they were doing with the forestry and how Culture Ireland was handing it over to Gresham House in London to essentially manage it.
Well, first of all, I was astonished by the statistic which I saw somewhere in your article, or I think in a video that was attached to it, that because Irish people think that there's lots of forests and trees in Ireland, and it turns out that the percentage of our land that is under forest is 2%.
Yeah.
And the average European percentage is 38%. This is absolutely incredible. To my mind, I wouldn't know. And moreover, most of this forestry is Sitka spruce, which is the worst possible. It's a foreign form of tree. It's not suited to this climate, this place at all. Yet it grows very fast. And it was intended for fast growth and fast profits. And this was Kilcha. But it was very interesting to me that what you pointed out, that the shift that happened with Kilcha was when the European Union brought in a new regulation or law to the effect that governments could no longer subsidise forestry. Isn't that correct? And therefore they had to go elsewhere to continue their operation and to do deals with outside interests.
But despite doing that, they've still not been able to adhere to their climate goals. So they've basically kind of introduced a foreign entity to manage the forests for absolutely no reason. So it's almost like these things are consistently engineered in order to get private investment companies who can then say, look, we can sell the wood back to the Irish because they've got a housing issue. They're actively doing that on their investment websites.
Yes.
And
But they're exporting a lot of the wood as well, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like this seems to be, it's almost like a metaphor for the entire, what's actually happening to Ireland, whereby where our resources are being stolen from us through these Gambeen men that we call politicians, that we call ministers, we call Taoiseach, we call Taoiseach, that their function seems to be in office and after out of office to asset strip the country that they were charged with actually governing and taking care of for the future generations.
But I'd even go so far to say that it's symbolic. It's almost like a spiritual war as well. It's like, you know, when you know that the roots are being literally pulled up, it's going to have a psychological effect on the people. It works in accordance with, you know, the replacement that's happening. So it's like a combination of these things.
It does seem to mirror.
It does, as above, so below.
Yeah. That they're exploiting our country. It seems to me that literally now the country, it's almost like I've been saying for years that the best comparison you can say is that we were left a property on the main street by our grandfather, and it's a shop front, and there's rooms overhead. And we couldn't think of what to sell in it, so we rented out the shop, and we lived upstairs. But it seems not long were we doing that. But actually, what we were doing at the same time was, instead of actually, to take the forestry metaphor, instead of buying firewood, we were ripping up the furniture to start with. Then we started on the doors, frames, and the doors. Then we started on the rafters. And now the roof is about to fall in, and the guys are about to run. But it's extraordinary that what the pattern that you describe, that, you know, for example, in the health service, the HSC, is another good example, that there's a bar on recruitment of Irish people. Then these people with political connections, and they all seem to have political connections, set up agencies, which then start to import workers, sometimes on zero contracts. There's huge money available for this. Irish people start immigrating to Canada and Australia because they can't get jobs in their own country. The country is full of their hospitals are full of doctors, nurses who are not Irish, and the next thing, these companies which are become so successful that they sell themselves, they can be sold off to international operators, who then set up boards, and suddenly you look at the boardroom and who's on it but a former Taoiseach, a former Taoiseach, a former Minister for Finance.
Well, what happened in Ireland is criminal, because they were told that the recruitment freeze, I think it was Mark McSharry, I put in the article, was going to cause a problem with having enough nurses.
Yes.
So again, it was another controlled demolition, but this time of the HSE. And, you know, the fact that the health minister's aunt and uncle profited to the amount of 110 million or however much it was by, you know, importing people to replace what could have been, you know, Irish nurses and doctors. And I was speaking to my cousin actually last night, and she said it's not even the fact that they've done that, it's the method by which they allocate the courses for the Irish nursing. So it's a point system, and if you get enough points, it's not based on your merit. It's it's a lottery whether you get these places. Yes. in Irish institutions. But even in Sligo, they cut the courses. I think there was 13 institutions where they cut about 350 courses.
Well, you see, if you look at across now at the history of recent Irish industrial policy, and particularly at the function of foreign direct investment, for FDI, in the economy, you see these extraordinary patterns that these companies were invited into Ireland in the first place on the basis that they would provide employment for Irish people. We now find that most of them actually employ a majority of, they bring in their own workers. And, you know, there's no, but one of the interesting things about it is that there was never an effort made in the education system to bring out, to educate people precisely, specifically for these kinds of industries, so that we would be able to provide all our own workers, specialists in these areas. There was no emphasis placed on that at all. It's like, Tracy, from the very beginning, the thing was a plan. I call it constructive deportation. It's almost as if that was the goal all along, to actually create conditions where Irish people would, as it were, voluntarily, but of course it's not voluntary, they would be coercively, by virtue of the risk of starvation and the lack of a life, to leave their own country and then meet their replacement or their two replacements at the airport.
I'd go so far as to say it's people trafficking, because you've got people that are being, squeezed out of Ireland. They can't afford to live here. Nurses can't afford to live in Dublin. They're being actively poached by recruitment companies to say, you'll have a great life if you move to New Zealand or Australia. They're leaving, and it's like a revolving door. And even the Indians and the Nigerians they're getting over here, after 2 years, they get their visa, so they too can leave and go to Australia. So these recruitment companies, which are now not even companies that are Irish owned, they're owned by Bain International, an American bank who we're paying for, are kind of, it's not going to stop.
Well, and there's also the additional factor, which I find quite extraordinary. These politicians tell us, well, we need these people for our health services. Well, yeah, that's because you brought in 2 million extra people, and the Irish people can't get an operation, they can't get a scan, they have to queue up or wait for months or maybe even years. So you're bringing in all of these people, and you're therefore having to bring in more doctors and nurses to cater for them, because the Irish people, the Irish doctors and nurses have no choice but to leave. Again, Tracy, I come back to this bottom line in all of these things. These are the things journalists exist to write about. And you're doing it, but nobody else is. I mean, is there anything about this in the mainstream media?
Well, it was really interesting because Jennifer Carroll McNeil said she was attacked she's the health minister.
Yes.
She was attacked on Twitter by her association with her aunt and uncle who own CPL, the people that sold the recruitment company to a Japanese company.
They're one of the biggest agencies for bringing in these people. Yes.
The Japanese company then sold it for 330 million euro to Bain International. And she was kind of, not attacked, but she was questioned on Twitter. And the question was, I can't remember the guy's name, but
Ewan McKenna, I think.
Yeah, Ewan McKenna. And he said two simple things. Do you think it's ethical that all these millions have been made on 0-hour contracts and people being imported in? And there was another really benign question, and she responded by saying, not one journalist or any media person or politician has tried to hold me to account for this. And also, I'm reporting this to, I can't remember what body it was, because this is harassment. So This is how Irish politicians now deal with any kind of discontent. You've got the same vein. You've got Simon Harris do it. They become victims, and they're now threatening the people who ask a very, very simple question.
But they're living in a very secure environment where they know that they are protected by the corrupt media, and will not be asked any inconvenient questions. And anybody who does seek to pursue them will be themselves pursued by that corrupt media. All of this, Tracy, it's. You see, I've been going on for years about the post-colonial condition of Ireland, and nobody's ever admitted up to it. But it's a classic thing. It's very unusual for Western countries to have this kind of experience, but we have it. We've had it. And we tick all the boxes, because one of the classic symptoms of this is what is called, sorry, I've forgotten the word now. It's concessions. Mm-hmm. Concessions. And that means that the leaders, so-called, of these corrupt post-colonial countries, which are incapable of self-starting, it seems, for all kinds of psychological and pathological reasons, that these guys, they survive in power by selling off chunks of the resources of the country to foreign interests. It's the same idea as the living over the shop and living off the rent. But and then they divvy up this among themselves. And that's true of an awful lot of your African countries in particular. But it's true of Ireland, and has been manifestly true of Ireland for years and years and years. And yet, people think that we are, a modern European nation, and self-confident, blah, blah, blah. This is the nonsense you hear all the time. We have never had an economy in Ireland. Not for since independence. What we have now is a cuckoo in the nest economy. It's a multinational, transnational economy comprised of American mostly corporations, who come in here and basically they rent out the country and pay the government, and the population are regarded as in the way. We're an inconvenience. We're interlopers in their business deals, their business activities, and yet this is the core of the corruption. That the people who should be reporting this, not only do they not do it, but they attack anybody. When I was writing about this 25 years ago, at a point where it wasn't visible to the extent that it is now, but it was obvious, I was attacked by my own colleagues, so-called. Now then, I got used to that in due course. But, and when you go right back, Tracy, it's quite phenomenal. People think even of somebody, and this is real heresy, this is real. But Sean Lemass, a very brilliant man, there's no question about it. But he was the founder of the foreign direct investment model. And with what's he called, the other guy, the civil servant, T.K. Whitaker. They're gods in the history of Irish economy. And yet they started the process, really, that has destroyed us, that has delivered us now to a point where people are hemorrhaging at a rate probably greater than it's ever since the famicides of the 1840s. And what you're saying here is basically the lumber. They're breaking it up for scrap. What you're describing in the forestry section, what you're describing in the health service, that it's got almost nothing to do with Ireland anymore as a culture, as a historical nation, as a population, as a people. Nothing.
Yeah, and I think even I was looking into. I haven't written it for you yet, but I was looking at a venture wave capital, which Enda Kenny sits on the global council of. That's a really interesting kind of company as well, because that's actively fusing Irish businesses with Bank of America investments. And it's called impact investments. So they're using they've basically whitewashed these venture capitalists under the guise of, look, aren't we progressive? We're helping the world. We're operating under the UN goals. So they're reframing themselves as philanthropists, and in doing so, they're justifying other ventures that are going to creep in and have an impact on us. It's mainly AI now. But I know the Edge is involved in this, and he's got a project.
What's he do? Does he play guitar for him?
No, he's Adam Clayton's involved in it as well. But his project is called, it begins with E, but it's something to do with the soil, and he's working in
soil renewal. Yes, yeah, that's a big thing now. Yeah.
So he's like the kind of cool face of this, but. You've got Enda Kenny being advised by a chap called Sir Ronald Cohen, who was a very big player in England back in the Blairite days. He was one of the biggest funders of the Labour Party. He got a peerage back then, and he's based in Tel Aviv, but he also stands shoulder to shoulder on forums with George Soros and Klaus Schwab.
Enda Kenny was at the scene of the crime, the central scene of the crime, back in 2011. Which was the start of this final phase, I believe, of the life of Ireland, where basically we had a silent coup, in which we got what we now have, and we've had since then a uniparty government. It doesn't make any difference what names over the door. It's the same policies. It's the same lies. It's the same corruption. And I remember actually in that election of 2011, buttonholing Kenny in the House Hotel in Galway when he was on a canvass with some of his candidates. And he told me that he was going to stand up to the bankers and all this stuff, you know, by God, I'm going to do it, you know. Well, he didn't do it. He delivered our country to those people, and now he's a vulture himself.
Exactly. Yeah.
Picking off the corpse of our country.
Yeah, but he's greenwashed himself, so that's fine. He's ethical. So, yeah.
What's going to be next, Tracy? Who's your next victim?
I don't know.
There's so many to choose from.
Yeah, there is too many to choose from. That's the problem.
Well, you know, it's very important work you're doing. I mean, nobody else is doing it. This needs to be chronicled. I mean, in the event that we can somehow turn this around, it'll be vital. But if we don't, it'll be even more vital. So at least people will understand what their delusion has led them into.
Yeah. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Tracy. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Hi, John. We've got some questions coming in from your patron subscribers at the moment. We've just got one in from John Mayer 8006. Thanks for sending a question in. He's put, great listening. John, do you think a day will ever come when RTE will be disbanded, and likewise the Irish Times and Co? Here's hoping.
Yeah, do I think that RTE will ever be disbanded? I do. I think, but I don't necessarily, I can't be certain that it'll be in very auspicious circumstances. I mean, it may be as a consequence and, you know, a new situation arising from all of the stuff that we're talking about. Because really we're looking at two possible futures. And, you know, one of which depends on people getting their gumption and their common sense back, our own people, before it's too late, if it's not already too late. And, you know, to be honest, there isn't a lot of evidence of that. The alternative, you know, that we would just go down the road to this rock in the Atlantic model of Ireland, which will have no place for the Irish people, have no place for Irish culture, have no place for memory of Ireland, of its history, of its patriots. It'll be a place to which Larry Fink will be the Pope and the Emperor, so then RTE will probably be disbanded because we will have, you know, probably have 327 different languages. We will have no history, we will have no culture, we'll have no philosophy, we'll have no literature. It'll be, you know, just a rock in the Atlantic. So in that circumstances, none of us can possibly care what happens to RTE. So I don't see the triumphant day that you're intimating there. I don't see it happening, to be honest. I don't, where we will all gather around the empty building in Montrose and torch it to the ground. I don't see that, I'm afraid. I wish I could.
Okay, thank you.
My next guest is a well-known person for being Thomas Sheridan. Thomas, how are you doing?
Great to be here, John.
Lovely to see you again.
Congratulations on your new
Thank you.
live stream.
So far, nothing's gone too badly wrong. But Thomas, the topic I'd like to talk to you about is slightly sketchy, maybe, but there's something in it. It's come to my notice that there's been a number of surveys recently, which by Emblematic research, and in both the Republic and in the north of Ireland. And they didn't go out looking for this, but this is what came through in some of the data that they picked up, that Gen Z is now indicating a very, very significant uptick in interest in religion and spirituality. Not at all, I think, in terms of institutional religion, but in some way that isn't quite clear because the research doesn't go into much detail. But nevertheless, there is a strong hint. You can see the uptick very visibly. And, you know, it's pretty remarkable in the Republic for certain, but in the north it's very accented, isn't it? So what do you make of that? Because it's against all of the hypotheses that each generation becomes more secular. This is the progressive agenda, that, you know, we become more rational, etc., etc. We seem now to have reached the pinnacle and we're now going back down, or up down the hill, or we're going back in the direction we came before, or something like it?
I think it's very profound, and I think it's multifaceted. I think in some ways it confirms what James was saying, that we are heading for a collapse, because there seems to be, all through history, whether it was the Roman Empire with all the late pagan cults like Dismanibus and Sol Invictus, or the Völkisch movements before World War I, there's something in a generation that comes along where they sense they run to spirituality. It's the weirdest thing. And before the Russian Revolution, you had this one of the reasons the Bolsheviks were so against any kind of religion or spirituality, because it had grown massively in Russia as both the Orthodox Church and they centered around the Romanovs, but also things like shamanism and the Tatars and the Siberians. The Bolsheviks were not only anti-clerical, they were also anti-pagan, and paganism was huge in places like Siberia and among the Tatars. And the Bolsheviks crushed them too. Now, this all flared up right before the revolution. This stuff all flared up right before the collapse of the Roman Empire. This stuff all flared up before World War I. There seems to be almost like a psychic manifestation of a generation that suddenly returned to a spiritual tradition. Now, on some levels, it's quite ominous, actually. When I first read about it, the first thing I thought was, well, here we are again. Western civilization is going to collapse. And I'd expect what you're hearing in this country is probably going on all over Europe, in Germany and Britain, everywhere.
Does that imply that it's based on some kind of fear, anxiety?
It's a weird thing, yeah. I think it's almost like an intuition. And there's two aspects to it. You'll always have a generation that will kind of rebel against the previous one. Like, we grew up in a time where we kind of said, well, we have to be more secular.
Yeah.
From our parents and our grandparents. Well, it's now their turn to say the secular thing didn't really fulfill anything, and now they begin a search. Now, on an individual level, that's a very healthy thing for people to go. It shows that they're not getting it from streaming Netflix. They're not getting something inside them from technology. So they're the stage one of that, and it's fascinating because they showed that there was a huge uptake in sales of Bibles in Ireland last year.
Yeah, there's also an uptake apparently in people watching religious, spiritual kind of YouTube videos.
Yeah,
which is another interesting thing.
Yeah.
But it doesn't seem to be like a new agey kind of thing, no. Or anything like that. It's not a fad in that way. It's not charismatic. It's not evangelical. It's like, it seems to be almost like a rational. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, and the data is very sketchy, and it needs a lot more research. But I just wonder if it is not some kind of return to fundamental thinking about the nature of reality and the nature of existence, because these are unsolved mysteries, and the only way atheism works is by ignoring them.
Yeah.
And if these people are looking at this and listening to these, and particularly the neo-atheist wave, the new atheist, the Hitchens-Dawkins thing, it was very unsatisfactory, I would say, for people of a curious disposition, because it didn't answer any of these questions. It ran away from them. I debated Christopher Hitchens, and I brought these things up with him. He was used to it. All he wanted to do was bash the church. I mean, there's a lot to bash in it, but that doesn't answer the questions that we're talking about here.
Yeah, I think the human soul, it has this. You can have a secular society, you could even have a viciously atheistic society like Mao's China or under the Bolsheviks, but it doesn't go away. You can't replace it with anything else. You can't replace it with. You can for a while with political dogma, but that will burn out eventually. You can for a while with commercial and materialistic things. But there's a point when a certain generation comes on, like I'm not being fulfilled by Amazon Prime. I'm not being fulfilled by frozen microwave pizza, and there's a sense of, it's not, and you're right, it's not like the New Age. The New Age is out of a sense of decadence. It's almost like a fad. But I'd say this one is I take this very, very seriously. Because usually when they start buying Bibles, and then he knows Leo Varadkar tried to make fun of it, he tried to play it down. He said, oh, it's all the immigrants from Brazil and Eastern Europe who are buying all the religious books. No, it's not. It's our share. And what they're doing is they're looking for something. And usually, if anyone who runs a spiritual or New Age bookshop, stage one is always to walk in the door and ask about early Christianity or something like that. You know, they're trying to find the root. Like, okay, I want to go back to but they only know Christianity, so they might ask around at things like that, and then they go on wider journeys. So it's a desire to get in touch with your personal spiritual self again, because you're not getting it out of the nonsense that we have in this world, this cheap materialistic technology world.
And do you think as well that given that we have all these intimations of totalitarianism coming at us from every angle, that seems to be a kind of an outcrop of the secular model of society, because it seems obvious, and C.S. Lewis used to say that, when man abolishes God, each of us do not become our own gods. What happens is a few men become gods, and they tell the rest of us what to do. And that's a very unsatisfactory state of affairs, far less satisfactory, I would say, than any kind of God, even if it's an imaginary God. And so I think that maybe that's a factor as well, that you talked about fear. Like the fear, there's really good cause for fear in that context. If you have children, if you haven't, I mean, if you're interested in the well-being of society and in the philosophy based on humanist principles, you're going to be deeply alarmed by what's happening.
Even if they're a superficially minded person and aren't really worried about the collapse of the world or the collapse of their economy, they still seem to do it. It's the weirdest thing. It's almost like a 100 monkey scenario where suddenly before society collapses, it's not, and even when there's no imminent, warning of it, there seems to be this generational uptake in spirituality happens, and you have all these growths of these both fundamentalist, what we'd call orthodoxical cults, rooted in what today would be Christianity, Islam, and so on. And then you also have the fringe ones, which would be, I'd put like Celtic paganism and Ireland into that, but you can have other things too, like there's a huge interest in things like shamanism. It's been bubbling under the surface. And I think it, as a personal individual thing, these people are developing almost like a psychic and spiritual firewall to help them deal with the catastrophes coming. But they don't really know it, but it's coming. So if you have a spiritual grounding and you say, okay, it's all about to fall apart, but I know that I'm more than just this flesh robot, that there's a greater dimension to me beyond this, it's extremely comforting if you only see yourself in terms of your relationship with your iPhone. You don't have that. Every single aspect of the decay is existential. But if you have a spiritual dimension to yourself, you'll say, well, I'm going to go to another life. I'm going to be here again. I'm going to go to heaven, whatever.
Yes, and I think also, we have lived through an era which kind of started with the 60s and with that particular version of freedom, which is based on sexuality and drugs and all that kind of stuff. And that and materialism were proffered then to the ensuing generations as the meaning of life. And it has taken perhaps until now for a generation to emerge to actually say, because I mean, our generations, I feel, Thomas, in general, have not been honest about their experience of those cultural developments, whether it's promiscuity, whether it's materialism, whether it's money. That there's,
especially here in Ireland.
Yeah, we know, like St. Augustine's famous, everything ultimately turns to disgust. And there's actually De Valera was talking about the limits of materialism back in 1943, and people they're still laughing at him. But he was onto something.
He warned about RTE on the opening address for when the station was launched. The TV station was launched. He said it has a terrifying capacity to change culture.
Yes.
He was absolutely right.
But it has changed it into it has diverted culture into a cul-de-sac that has no possibility of satisfying people ultimately with satisfying the desires that are there in the human heart.
So it gets more and more shock. See, that's how they do it. Like, this type of wholesome TV isn't working. Let's try more shock, more decadent, more outrageous TV shows. I mean, eventually, if they were continuing on this path, they'd have TV shows where they'd be hunting humans alive and stuff like that. This is like it goes down, because there's nothing else. They can only go to the next sort of adrenaline rush within these kinds of tech media ways, progressions through the world.
Would there be some parts of this that would you be, in a certain sense, and I don't necessarily use this word in a pejorative sense because it has obviously a basis in logic and common sense, but would it be to some extent moralistic? I'm thinking of things like the recent developments of, say, things like pride parades, where you have fellas going out with everything hanging out in front of children.
Yeah.
Like that, we kind of tend to think of young people as being feckless, but they're not. They're human.
Well, it's the lack of boundaries as well. It's like those things always went on in the past. But they went on in places like Studio 54 in New York or in Soho in London.
Yeah.
They didn't take place in small towns in the west of Ireland or anywhere in the provincial world. That's the difference. There's a constant need to impose. I mean, the Bolsheviks, a part of their war against spirituality, had these groups called the constructivists, who basically traveled around the Soviet Union on trains that put on these weird performance art things and weird paintings and weird kinds of topography. And the whole purpose was to destroy their culture. This is the great, it still exists today. The great problem for the Marxists has always been they can't defeat culture. It drives them mad. They think about it night and day. They subvert it with things like extreme feminism, extreme decadence, extreme everything. They hate organic culture, and the only way they think they can destroy it is by complete distortion. And you have the whole thing now like non-linear warfare, where you don't even know what's reality anymore when you switch on the evening news. You could have like a situation where you have a game show that's all trashy and noisy and loud, and then the next thing is followed by a report that shows executions from somewhere in Eastern Europe or something. So the whole thing was to destroy us in any way they can, but it's not working because fundamentally they're using this kind of Freudian kind of aspect that came out of the whole Frankfurt New School, in New York, and the whole concept that is destruction of the human psychology in order to rebuild it again. But they can't do it because they fundamentally don't understand that, and this is definitely true. And I know this sounds, some people may hear this, maybe think it's twee, but we are not outside the whole thing of a cultural, economic, literal war. We're dealing with a spiritual war. This is a spiritual war we're in, and everything else like that, from the economy to international relationships to everything else, is a subsect of that. And I think a certain amount of the population are realizing that if the society collapses, the only thing that will keep me going is a belief in a higher power of any kind, of whatever that is, because that always seems to give people an advantage that continue on. Otherwise, there's no point in surviving. It may even be a biological thing. It may even be an evolutionary thing that they have these spiritual identities kicking off right before a collapse. It could, you could even put it. Do it in a secular way, but to me, it's one of the most significant things that's happened in this country in my lifetime, because it was organic, it wasn't engineered.
I wonder if there's an esoteric element to it as well, in the sense that, there's a lot of talk, which, is kind of sounds a bit woo-woo, but it may be, I've seen up close some evidence of it, that as we progress through the generations, not necessarily by the names of them, but as we go back, and I see this now in young children, there's a strange, unfamiliar dimension to children now that are emerging. And there's talk about what they call crystal children, and there are other names for them as well, who have capacities. For example, in the context of reincarnation, to remember their past lives. But it seems to me that these children, some of these children are extraordinarily endowed with understandings and curiosity in ways that the other generations, like the millennials, didn't have.
They have a depth about them. I've noticed that the young kids now, they're almost like old souls returning or something.
Yes.
Which ties in with so many spiritual traditions, from Hinduism to Buddhism to even our own pagan traditions, that the whole concept that the soul returns in and again, it doesn't have to be necessarily, when you said it's esoteric, everything is esoteric.
Yeah.
There's nothing that isn't esoteric. But I definitely think, I have a great belief in trusting the plan. And that no matter what humans do, the universe is always one step ahead of it. And that's the plan. And you just go with the flow and you deal with things as they come along.
Thank you so much. Very interesting,
welcome.
Thomas. We hope to talk about it at Moreland in the future.
Thank you.
Hi, John. Just before we bring all the guests back for the one final chat, the panel at the end now, we're getting a few questions coming in from your patron. The first question I've got to read out, it's the same topic, so I'll read out both questions, yeah? The first one's from a lady called Nicola. She put, do you think Freemasonry and their oath to each other is what's really destroying this country? Nobody talks about the secret groups and brotherhoods. And the other question was of a similar context, was a guy called Nem2112. And his question was, any thoughts on Freemasonry and their oath to each other? That's the question.
Well, I mean, I'm completely opposed to secret societies, and I mean that's implicit in the Constitution and the laws of the land that people in power should not be involved in secret organisations. I'm not very well versed on Freemasonry and all that kind of stuff. In fact, Thomas, we might get into this in a discussion later on to some extent, because I think Thomas would certainly be better qualified to talk about this than I am. But I mean, these are not good things. I mean, strangely, I was talking to somebody. I did an interview recently with a man from Iceland, a politician there, and I brought up this subject in the interview, and it turned out that he was actually a Mason himself, and he said that he believes that it was a fairly harmless thing. He had never seen anything like this. Now, I get the impression this guy is very honest and clear-minded and so on. So I have heard it said that these organisations are perfectly functional and fine up to a certain point, but it's the upper echelons that are invisible that are problematic. I just don't know enough about it, I'm afraid, to say definitively. But I certainly would urge people not to have any truck with anything that is secretive in that way, and that's seeking to influence public policy or public affairs in any way. Should be open and above board and put their name to what they say, stand up and say it, and the devil take the consequences. I don't agree with any of that stuff. So we're going to have a panel discussion now. We will bring that up with and see what our panel make of it. What? So we have James back again. We have Thomas and Tracy, and so let's talk about that. James, are you an expert on Masons?
I'm not an expert, but I do believe that they're a very, very important structure with regards to the running of the world. I think from the reading I've done into it, that the degrees of depravity seem to go up as they rise through the ranks of it. I think what we're seeing now with the release of the Epstein list and that is, we're beginning to see the mythologies at the very higher echelons of power, how they build trust amongst each other is to have dirt on each other that's of the most depraved nature. It's frightening. It's very, very frightening that there could be groups of people behind everything who have committed the most audacious crimes against humanity that's thinkable.
Is there any intimation there in relation to the Epstein files that there is a significant Masonic element to it?
I don't know about Masonry with regards to it, but I do. The depravity and the pedophilia is very.
Yes.
It seems to be a cross-cultural thing. Like the Epstein files involves Americans, Europeans, Arabs,
Sure.
Asians. There seems to be this element that at the very higher echelons of finance and geopolitics, that there seems to be a pedophilic element, which is absolutely frightening.
It seems to be more than it is a sexual thing. It is a control thing.
Yes, it seems that to get to those positions, for the trust to be developed amongst each other, that they need to have something downright rotten. And the references to cannibalism in this are outrageous.
So that the people wishing to go to achieve power positions of power have to volunteer for these processes in order to go through the ritual, through the trials, or as whatever you would call them, in order to be compromised, as is required by the people who have the real power.
Well, it seems so. And then if you see the amount of the skull and bones and stuff like that in the history of American presidencies and large corporate entities and stuff like that, it doesn't seem to be accidental.
Grand Lodge in London, in the city of London,
yes,
where Roberto Calvi, who was a Freemason and a Vatican banker, pounded on the door before he was found hanging off Blackfriars Bridge. Yeah, there's kind of like the nerdy Masons. The majority of the ones in Ireland would be like nerds, upstairs, social climbers. But then there's another kind of Freemasonry, and you only get, it's like the Secret Unknowns things, you only get hints of it.
Yeah.
And when it surfaces, it's bloody dark, you know.
Well, now you have an element at the moment with the Metropolitan Police, where they're basically saying, oh, well, you can't be a Mason and be in the police force and that. Well, it turns out, well, by God, there was a lot of Masons in the police force.
Yes.
And they're not at the lower ends, they're at the highest echelons of it, you know. And
since the 90s, when people have asked me, like, what's a conspiracy you can prove? And it's the book In God's Name by David Yallop about the actual... The Roberto Calvi, the Vatican Bank, and the Freemasons, and it's all documented there.
it's not a conspiracy.
No. It's and it's all, you know. The doctor of Prince Philip was the one who did the autopsy on Calvi's body. They said he committed suicide. I mean, it was just, and it's just incredible stuff, you know. And it's all real. It's all. We know from Jimmy Savile that there was protection there. Jimmy Savile was protected by. The elements were in the South and West Yorkshire Police.
But if I can expand, sorry, John, if I can expand a little bit on what yourself and John was saying, amongst the younger generations, I'm 32. We're looking at the 60s and up, and I'm honest to God, it's coming to the point of ridicule that we're looking and we're saying, okay, so you spent all of your life working a ridiculous job for now probably no pension, and you were ran by a bunch of paedophiles that you knew were paedophiles, and you decided not to do anything about it because that's just the way things are. And I think this is going to be a generational thing where, my God almighty, young people are going to look at who's in power now and go, wow, ye knew all of this?
Yes.
And it's undeniable, you know. The amount of things that have been let go. Like, we can, as a young farming community in this country now, we can look at who manages the farming and the sky, and it's ridiculous. Yeah. Like, the essence of backhanders is so plain. You see, this is where I think with AI comes in now and starts looking over the books and all of this. And we have to look to an older generation and say, so all of that corruption was happening, and you knew about it, and you done nothing about it. Like even the image there the other day of the 8 Gardaí landing to the Burke household. It's ridiculous.
It is, yeah.
It's becoming so, you know, it's becoming so blatant, so it is.
Well, James, I want to come to the Burke thing in a little while, but I want to get into this thing a little bit more. I'm just wondering, this is now a question, I don't necessarily expect people to know what the answer to this is, but, you know, when we think about the power structures that Thomas talks, the secret unknowns, and that sort of defines both the problem and the situation, okay, so you have Freemasons here, but you also have your Bilderbergers, and you have your Club of 300, and you have all these other entities.
And your Jesuits and your Rosicrucians.
So what is the configuration of power within this, whatever you would call it, at the top of the pyramid, whatever that apex, which is the top, whatever, 1% of the powerful? How do these different forces, because the Bilderbergers are different to the World Economic Forum, which are different to the Masons, so how does it work? Have you any idea, Thomas, what the kind of...
At the very top? increasingly in my life, I don't believe it's human anymore.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's aliens or spacemen or something like that. It could be a computer. It could be something like, some kind of almighty AI computer that they've had for decades that's running it, that they worship. But I think, I definitely think that it's not human at the top, or they're biological hybrids, or they're people who use transhumanism to change themselves, or it could even be a spiritual force. I just don't know. But it just seems to me that the higher you get up, and as we've seen from the Epstein thing, the less human it is. Yeah. I mean, did you ever think we would grow up in a world where we'd be hearing about, elites eating babies on islands and stuff like this?
Yeah.
Well, it's and it gets darker and darker and darker.
That is the thing, we've talked about this before, Thomas. That even if you don't believe in the woo-woo stuff or the esoteric stuff or whatever you would call it, these things they're functional as metaphors in a way that nothing else is to explain, or not to explain, but to throw light on what's happening. I mean, some of these things are inexplicable. I mean, the abuse and satanic abuse and rape of children, the murder, the cannibalization of children. If this is happening, it's so far off the charts that there's nothing in our minds, there's nothing in our laws that can deal with this. But what is, I'm just curious to see how this, for example, the Antarctica thing. Where there's this rumor about some kind of entity which is secreted away there, has secreted away there for many, many, many centuries, and that it controls the world in some indirect way. Is that even remotely conceivable? I mean, it's like the moss.
I'm open to everything now. I consider all those science fiction books and novels I grew up as a kid as training for where we're living now. You and me and Tracy talk about this all the time. Yeah, I believe that we're living in here's an example. Do you remember when we first started getting to know each other during the height of the lockdowns and all that stuff? We often spoke about this feels like a very dark, unhuman time. We could taste that a demonic force or something was running the world. It was literally palpable during the worst days of the lockdown. And that's because it's true. We have to start accepting that there's something. I mean, increasingly, you look at the behaviour of the kind of left-wing activists, they behave more and more like demons.
Well, it is. And what Tracy is talking about there, this thing, Tracy, about, politicians who make patriotic speeches for years and have talked about Pierce and Connolly, and now they're vultures picking at the corpse of our nation, of our culture, of our economy, of our people, of our resources, everything. And without any sense of so it's like there's a possession, some kind of process of possession in train, doesn't it?
I think in certain cases, it was always there. I think the past few years, you were going on about the Masons, but I was thinking back to the Bullingdon Boys Club, the Oxford. Mm-hmm. We in England, when I was living in England, there was a Prime Minister. And people were saying, recounting times where he was kind of fornicating with a pig's head. Was it Heath? We consented to this.
Johnson, yeah.
No, it was
was it Johnson?
Cameron, wasn't it?
Heath.
Yeah.
And then Skull and Bones.
This was always there.
They tie a string around your penis and pull it. I mean, these are the people who are running our world,
Yeah.
But ultimately, it comes down to trust, and unfortunately, a criminal element would be able to explain it, because the criminal element would say, well, if I'm going to engage with another criminal, we both have to have information on each other that could put us away for a very long time. And then we trust each other.
So let's get this one out of the way, because I talked to John Wedger about this, and he, I was quite surprised, because this is, there's a certain naivety about this in terms of myself, because and I think a lot of people would share this naivety. And I just want to clarify this point, because most people would think that what they're talking about is a sexual perversion, that it's a misplaced attraction, for example, minor attracted adults, whatever, that kind of stuff. But it seems that that's a minimal element of what's going on.
It's energy harvesting. it's like they're sucking in psychic energy and everything else, and they're getting thrills from it, and it's also demoralizing. Look what we can do to your children. That's what the Epstein files ultimately are saying, and you look at the rape jihad thing in Rotherham and so on. Yeah. What the establishment is saying, we can do anything we want to your children, and you can do nothing about it. So there's a burlesquing, a humiliation ritual about it as well.
Before we finish, I want to go into briefly into the Enoch Burke situation, because it seems to be escalating now at a level. Again, you have to look at this story as well and say, like, what is driving these lunatics to do what they're doing? I don't mean the Burkes at all, but these judges. Like, we have a judge who seems to have tricked Enoch Burke into believing that his case was going to get a fair hearing. And the minute he walked into the court, he bollocked him out of it and had him dragged away on a total pretext. And now they're arresting the mother and a sister and seeking to arrest them and put them in jail as well. What on earth is happening to our country? I don't mean them. I know we kind of have discussed what might be going on there, but what is wrong with the people that they cannot see this and say, stop, no more of this stuff?
Yeah. I want to expand on what yourself and Thomas said earlier. There seems to be a two-tier reaction to this. The older generation seem to be one of two things, which is this is absolutely abhorrent, it's the worst thing ever. Then there's another part of the older generation saying, rightly so, law and order must be held up. And then there's my generation who look on and say, my God, you're fruitcakes. You have lost your minds. Like, it's from a young observer to watch the Burke thing. We predominantly think both Burke and the state look ridiculous. But
if I can see how that is until you actually dig into the facts of this. Because when you go into the facts of it, what you see is something different. It's not like that there's two of them in it. There's one of them in it, which has been crooked from the start. The Wilson's Hospital School have been running this. Yeah. And Enoch Burke, it seems to me, okay, if you could say it's an offence to do things that embarrass other people or make other people feel awkward, then he's guilty. But if you actually say this guy was a teacher, he took it seriously, he took his vocation seriously, and he was in a situation where he was, it was a double bind. A double bind is something which is like it's impossible to resolve for yourself. He couldn't do it. And he said so, quite honestly. And that issue has never been dealt with by any court.
No, and it won't be.
And there was no legal basis for the injunction that was given to him. None. So, he had two choices. He could walk away, admit implicitly that there was something wrong in his behaviour, or he could do what he did.
Yes.
That's to my view.
But the estimation that he's making, and it's a mistake, is that the courts are following the law. They're not.
I agree with that.
This is the crux of the issue.
But isn't there something to be said, James, in trying to flush that out? I mean, when myself and Jim O'Doherty took our case against the lockdown, there was an element of that, what we were doing. We didn't expect these crooked bastards to do anything other than what they did. But at least we're going to dramatise it. We're going to show the public at some level. But of course, again, not alone were we forgetting, in that case, it wasn't that we were forgetting about the corruption of the judiciary. We were actually forgetting about the corruption of the media, which actually exceeded itself in its willingness to bury what we were actually saying.
But you see, at this moment in time, and it's a desperately important thing, because the vast majority of people who will be watching this are semi-awake, what I would be saying to everyone is, you're watching the fall of Rome. You can be an observer from a distance, or you can go down trying to fight it. This is a circus, and the tent is falling. Don't be under the tent.
Well, the judge said this is a clown show, but he's the clown.
But they're all clowns. We were guilty of it ourselves. We engaged with a political system that is absolutely outrightly set out now that anyone with an alternative opinion cannot achieve anything in it.
Yes.
There's a corporate system that means unless you come from the right people and the right education and that, you're going nowhere in it.
Oh, it's every sector, James.
Exactly.
It's the arts, it's journalism, it's
Yes.
whatever. You cannot succeed unless you bow the knee
Yes.
to this corruption.
But you see, this is what the younger people... For now.
That will all collapse.
But you see, this is what I think the younger people are really doing it. They've seen it for what it is. And they're saying, I don't want to be involved with that. I'm going to get my alternative lifestyle going. And that's it. Like, for me, I think the hope is with the younger people. And I really like the point you made earlier about the children, because I see that in my own children. They're not kids from 10 years ago.
No.
They're not.
James, no. It's amazing.
There's a 2-year-old there now who's behaving as a
I'll tell
25.
you, what I have seen is like it's almost kind of it's uncanny, because actually what it is a child less than 1 year old who is listening to you, who's talking to you with their eyes, and they're talking in a kind of a babble, but it's perfect sense to them. The only problem is there's a disjunction between my language and her language. We are each speaking to each other, and we are both, in a strange way, understanding each other. It's quite uncanny, because you can read this in the expression. It's the knowingness. You know, when something happens, she's looking. We say, "Are there any crows out today?" You know, and the next thing she sees one, and she just looks at me as like at 9 months old. Mm-hmm. You know. Like, it's uncanny. So there's something absolutely mysterious emerging now in the human race itself, which kind of bears out something that I've long kind of said as a kind of a pious hope, that the human heart has the capacity to renew itself in spite of anything, can overcome any adversity, and that the closer you come to extinction, to doomsday, the more intense that energy becomes. Mm. Thanks very much, everybody.
John, we've got lots of questions coming in, John.
Okay, well, maybe they can answer.
We're going to let this roll longer now, because there's a lot of feedback, there's a lot of questions coming in.
Okay.
So we're going to keep this going for a little bit longer, because we're getting a lot of good feedback. Is that okay? Yeah. There's a question here from a guy called Mark Kelly 3358. This is to you and the rest of the panel, so whoever wants to answer these questions. He says he's 40. He works 2 jobs and still lives in his childhood bedroom. And he said, many of us feel like there's no future left. What would you say to people thinking about leaving Ireland for good? That's to you and the rest of the panel. So,
well, for my part, I would say don't go. We need you to stay. Give it a little while longer. I think, as Thomas just said there, we're heading towards some kind of collapse for sure. You know, and I've always said in these situations, you know, whatever you do, don't give up, because it would be a terrible tragedy for any of us if we gave up on the day before the revolution, you know, and find that we weren't invited to the party then the next night. So stick with it. I think we're you know, what I've just said, actually, I do think that the capacity of the human race to renew itself is something that we should not underestimate. And when things are blackest, therefore, is when we should pay most attention. And I think that this is a moment like that now. Do you agree, Thomas?
Yeah, I did my stint overseas. And I came back to Ireland because there was something in Ireland that wasn't anywhere else. I can't explain it, but there was and I wasn't Mr. Super Patriot or anything like that, but there was a magnetism in this country that brought me back. That's a special energy. Another thing I would say to that chap is that, okay, it's really shitty. Sorry, it sucks that you're living with your parents and you're working 2 jobs, but you can often find you go overseas and you might meet the same thing with just different scenery. You could be living in a flat with 3 other people and you won't have any more of a lifestyle. My attitude, you see, look, in lots of countries, single people live with their parents for all their lives nearly, if they don't get married and stuff, and they don't see it as a bad thing. They see it as a way to save up money and have a kind of a free lifestyle. You know, I don't mean in a parasitic way, but I mean it's a way. It's not they use it to their advantage. They travel, they do things. It's how you see things is important as well. You know, you could leave Ireland, great. There's nothing wrong with traveling and broadening your horizons, but you might find that it's the same there in a different way. And I mean, so many people seem to have gone to Australia, and it's just as mad there as here in terms of prices and the cost of living. Canada's even more woke than we are. And so okay, there is the excitement and the adrenaline rush of new scenery and new vibes and new people and stuff like that. But that doesn't last. That doesn't last. I would say, like, instead of seeing it as a terribly negative thing, and a lot of that's cultural programming, see it, the positives of that you now have the freedom that you can do whatever you want and still go home, have a home to go to that your parents provided, and reevaluate yourself and reevaluate how you look at things. It's like the Chinese thing that the word crisis and opportunity have the same meaning. It's the same thing. If you reevaluate it. So I would say if you want to go, good for you, but don't think you're going to get salvation. You could find the same thing. Or if I was you, I would said if I was in that position now, I would just use it to, if I got on, it depends if you get on with your parents, if you're friends with your parents, that's a lot to do it as well. But I would turn it around to my advantage. I would say, I've got freedom here that someone who doesn't have a home, in terms of they're on the rental market and stuff, I have a bit of security here. Now let me work this to my advantage. That's what I would do.
Tracy?
I'd be inclined to say the same as Thomas. I think whatever's going to happen is going to happen really fast, and it's not going to matter where you're going to be. We're all going to have the same troubles. But I think for men especially, it's very hard. My son, he's only 25, but he'll be saying the same thing now, about he's got a great job. But to secure accommodation, that's a big thing. It was, it should have been a right for people to be able to call a place their home or their own. And it does have an impact on, kind of people's outlook. But like Thomas said, I think the main, the important focus is just to carve a way around that. We have to deal with the cards we've got at the moment. But what would be great is if there was some kind of advocacy service. They are building houses, but we're not at the top of the queue.
No.
And what we need to do is try and find a way or have some kind of advocacy service that's run, on a voluntary basis even, to help our own people navigate, this housing problem.
Okay.
If there can be.
We better move on, because I think Cliff has quite a few people there.
Yeah, there's a lot coming through, John. Yeah, there's a guy called Joseph O'Donoghue, 26. He said, is the Citizens' House made up of members picked like a jury to oversee the door a good idea?
Say it again.
He just said, is the Citizens' House made up of members picked like a jury to oversee the door a good idea?
I don't think so, because we've seen that with different bodies, the Constitutional Convention and the Citizens Forum, or whatever it was called. Those things are subject to rigging, and they're also subject to manipulation by propaganda in the course of their deliberations. They're presented as kind of democratic instruments, but they're not at all like that. So I don't trust anything of that nature, and particularly if it's suggested from the political system. Only things that are enforced on the political system at this stage should be even contemplated.
I don't really have an opinion on. I'm kind of ex-political at this point, but yeah, generally those things don't work. I mean, they just don't. I think people should be looking beyond politics to sort of solve, communities, groups, families, friends, tribal things. That's where we should be looking now, and not constitutional politics. I think that world is dead anyway. Yeah,
well, it is. Yeah, I mean, but we saw the way that things were manipulated in relation to various referendums and so on. What they do is they put people into a big room, they sit them around, and then they pummel them with experts' opinions. And it's very easy. It's very easy to manipulate a group. Like if I was sitting around this was the boardroom table, and everybody. I've seen this actually in boards, where I'd be thinking, well, I want to get this thing through now, and. Dave down there at the bottom, like he's solid, like but Conway here, he's a troublemaker. Mm-hmm. So if I go to Conway first and ask his opinion, he'll turn the whole table against the issue. Whereas if I go there, Dave will give it a good start, and by the time it gets to Conway, it's too late to do anything about it. And all of this kind of trickery is available to the people operating these systems. And the democratic system is limited enough in the secrecy of the ballot box, But that's, I think, should be the extent to which we allow the politicians to impose any new, because they try to make opinion polls into a democratic instrument, and they're completely malleable and manipulable.
I don't know anyone who ever was consulted in a poll in this country in my life. You know, these polls, I've never met anyone. I just think they pulled the numbers out of their arse.
Possibly.
They've done that. I've noticed that the past 10 years, and they've run with headlines to introduce a subject. And I think one of the most noticeable ones, well, we had the COVID vaccine, but it was conscription and dropping the triple lock as well. So they've kind of tiptoed round making any announcements and been so cowardly that they use these tactics in order to prepare us for, the next.
Yeah, it's like anything that's there is there for their benefit. Otherwise it wouldn't survive.
In relation to opinion polls, like how many people do you meet with an informed opinion on anything?
None.
If you're going to have a random selection process for an opinion poll, you'd want to be fairly certain that they know what they're talking about.
People regurgitate.
And you don't meet too many of them.
But the same thing with the elections, and democracy wasn't meant for all the plebs. I mean, they call that plebiscite for a reason. Yes. It was meant for an educated elite, landowners and so on. It was never meant for, like I said, somebody, you get in Ireland, you get that thing, no, sure. That's their answer to everything. What is that really telling you? I haven't a fucking clue. Yeah, you can't have a conversation with anybody.
And then if you go to the beginnings of democracy, like the Greeks were very, very explicit about this. You had to train people how to vote. They had to be trained how to think and how to look at something critically. This idea of everyone has a deciding voice.
The Federalist Papers, the Americans' founding fathers struggled enormously with the concept of democracy. Mm-hmm. They hated it in many ways, but they said we have to deal with it. But the thing was that they said the same thing. It was people who were educated, and should be the ones who should vote. No, education meant something different back then. Mm-hmm. So the American education system from the very early point was to make sure that everyone got a really healthy education. So when it came to voting, they could vote. Mm-hmm. But since nowadays, and for many decades now, democracy is just buying the election. What do you want? And I'll promise it for you if you vote for me.
Well, I'll give you a demonstration of this, and I'm fully aware it happens. In this very town we're in, there are numerous houses where there are people who are actually cared for because they are mentally disabled. And they are brought by political parties to the voting station to vote. They literally bus the mentally disabled to vote.
Oh, well, I mean...
Now,
that's an old communist technique, actually, an old Bolshevik technique. They would bring people who had mental issues to start riots and to cause commotions at council meetings and stuff like that.
Sinn Féin were the masters of that. I mean, they would go into an old folks' home and tell the matron or whatever, have you done those votes yet? Oh yes, we have them yet. Oh, we'll take them. We'll take charge. We'll drop them off at the returning officers' headquarters, and they would just doctor.
But even that, right? That's corruption or that. But the idea that you can have votes being collected from people who are absolutely, did you know, these people are mentally disabled.
Oh, I know.
You shouldn't be allowed to vote. Like, you should get all the care in the world that you deserve, but my God, you can't be choosing things.
Well, you see, the ethic of democracy now is based on the idea, well, sure, you're entitled to your opinion, and it's as if that opinion is as good as any other opinion. But of
think
course,
how evil you'd have to be to think like that. These people are dealing with, cognitive issues and all kinds of mental problems from schizophrenia. Let's take advantage of them.
Oh yeah,
it's disgusting. Yeah.
Cliff.
Another question just coming from Carbang Killers. She was inquiring about the Bill Gates course in Holland. So we've got the Dutch court orders Bill Gates and Pfizer CEO to testify over alleged deadly mRNA. I don't know what the opinion is of the panel.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm not familiar with the system in Holland, but I don't have a lot of faith in it because Holland is a very corrupt country politically. And
all my Bilderbergers.
It seems most improbable that Bill Gates will be led away in chains as a result of these proceedings. Something will turn up, I have no doubt.
I have a feeling Gates will very shortly be dead.
I agree.
Not actually, but he'll just exit stage left.
Yeah.
He has enough money. They can make him go away. He's a problematic man.
Yes.
Now you're dead. You're actually living on an island in the Caribbean and you'll have a nice time.
This is a remarkable thing, actually, about that he's such an appalling creature.
Yes.
You'd wonder how anybody thought he was a suitable person to put out fronting for anything.
But here's an interesting, you're not familiar with The Simpsons at all, John.
Vaguely, yes.
They actually done Bill Gates years ago, an indication of him. He was Artie Ziff, the kind of technocrat
Where
that was a little bit...
And it ends up with a machine gun fight at the end.
Yeah, a little bit touchy-feely, do you know, and he... Yeah.
Homer, you do what you want to do. That's our philosophy. Yeah, and that's how he did it. Because when I was working in New York, I met people who worked at Microsoft in Seattle. And this is back in the early 90s. And he said, well, what's it like working at the Coke compound? This fella's like eating pizza in the hallway, wearing shorts, talking about what Bill said today over the microphone. Yeah. So that's how he did it. He basically was Jim Jones, who was able to write software code and patent it. That's basically what he was.
Well, these, do you know the tech companies and all that? There's a sort of a similarity between, you know, Plato's Symposium, where they're all lying round on couches, kind of semi off their heads, talking about. Bankman,
what was his name? The Bankman, the guy,
Sam Altman.
Yeah, they were lying in beds doing Bitcoin trading.
Yeah,
and having pizza being brought to them.
Yeah. But again, indicative of the end of a society, because in that thing in Greece, it all happened at the same time.
Well, you all think of it when Rome was collapsing, them lying in the togas, lying on the couch eating grapes.
You see, to kind of answer the question in a kind of a fundamental way, and it is implicit in everything we're saying, but at the end of the day, all this stuff will either be stopped or it won't. And until such time as it's soft, then no justice will manifest.
Or
no truth will
manifest under its own weight, which is always, do you know, obviously Persia had evil people at the end. Obviously, you know, Greece had evil people at the end, and Rome and the whole. Sometimes it just collapses.
Rome collapsed because the ruling families were just crazies.
Yes.
You know, there was one emperor, Marcus Aurelius, not the famous writer, who was actually transgender and was paying doctors to turn him into a woman.
That's not the Meditations fellow, no?
No, it's the same name, but a different emperor.
Okay,
I always have to explain this. His name is also Marcus Aurelius, which is very unfortunate because the other one, Meditations guy's a genius.
Yeah, I was going to write him off my hero list there for a second.
He can firmly remain there. But yeah, the ruling families at the end of Rome, they were just nut jobs, you know, and that's what really, you know, Christianity finished it off, but that's what really ruined it was the nut jobs running the country, and that's what's happening here. It was Epstein's Island, you know, in Latin, you know.
Yeah. Well, the weird thing about Epstein's Island is like that there seems to be a kind of a general consensus among people with influence and power to do things about it, or not do things about it, that essentially it's going to amount to nothing. Isn't that the feeling you get? That somehow or other this will just go away?
I think the fact that they're talking about this court case in the Netherlands for Bill Gates is kind of indicative of what happened on Epstein's Island, because he pulled out of an event. I can't remember what it was. I think it was in India the other day, and I was thinking, that's weird. And it had something to do with some revelation in the Epstein file. But the fact that now the story is, he's going to be kind of questioned for genocide crimes, you know, it's almost like they're having to bring out story after story to exhaust us, and then exhaust the initial story. You know, it's just like trauma bonding to this, you know.
Amazing. How did he get away with that? Him and his wife, their pillow talk was basically at the end of the night, how many Africans did we eliminate today?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's literally what they did. They eliminated Africans.
Yes. Yeah, and they were banned from a significant amount of countries.
Yeah.
But and yet, if you were to ask probably 70% of the Western population, what's your view of Bill Gates? Oh, he's a philanthropist.
Yeah, but I think at some pitch, and this is I think you have great faith in humanity, John. My faith, my faith is gone. My faith is gone. Protect yourself and your family. Like, if someone asked me, would you ever run in politics again? I said, no.
Well, I wouldn't either.
No, because
it's a stupid thing to do.
It's insanity what's going on.
Yeah.
If you're dealing with people who you could, quite literally, on the main television station in the country, walk two men in giant plastic bubbles up to each other. And
You can get away with anything.
yeah. Like this was a humiliation ritual.
Oh, yeah.
Burlesquing, yeah.
Yeah.
And that was a big thing in ancient Rome as well, was the burlesquing of people. They used to, dress them up as chickens and make them walk down the streets and stuff like that. It's incredible, the parallels. And also, like, you know, the engineering started collapsing, the sewage system broke down, the water, the inflation was through the roof, the markets collapsed, the food supply collapsed. There was everything that's happening today, it was happening in Rome about, 200 AD.
James, I would question, I know what you mean. What I had faith in, I think that I realised right at this minute now, more than humanity, was the structures that humanity had put in place to protect itself.
As the structures have fallen apart.
Completely.
That's why there's a return by when you were on about earlier, that was riveting. Young people returning to religion or that. I don't think it's just an element of comfort at the end. For my age group, I like shamanism and I like things like that. The idea for me is this is what we'll be going forward with after the end of that. Like we see most of the people in my age group that I'm friends with, we foresee total societal collapse.
Yes.
That's why we're living on little farms and we're trying to build communities and that, because we want to live the far side of it. I have young children in the house.
Yes.
I don't want to go with the idea of this is the end, my only friend, the end. I want to live the far side of it.
Yes.
So I have to develop the communities and develop the religiosity for the next
that's
stage.
That's a healthy attitude, James.
Yeah, but like even the parallels with Rome about the infrastructure collapsing. Look at the mica and pyrite in Ireland. This is the same thing. The Roman engineers, they weren't watching the concrete works as they were up until that point, and all of a sudden the infrastructure started crumbling and falling because the concrete wasn't being met as well. What happened with our houses in this country? This is all indicative of a society that's just on the edge.
I'll give you another one, showbiz. The Romans towards the end, the Colosseum was built for 4 or 5 events a year. On all their Colosseums.
Yes.
And I remember visiting the one at Verona, and they were saying towards the end the Romans were non-stop entertainment.
Yes.
Because it was literally to stop the country from collapsing.
Yes, we're bread and circus. Yeah.
And that's us, isn't it?
One last question.
This question is just directed to you this time, John.
All right.
You ready? It's a guy from, he's called Can Raymond Toulouse, and he wants to know, John, if you had one request from the door, what would you require?
From the doll?
From the door, yeah. If you had one request.
To ask the doll for something.
Maybe.
Dissolve thyself. Immediately. Now. Or I'll call the guards. No, I won't call the guards. I'll call the lads and they'll arrest the guards and then they'll arrest you.
Me and John had a fierce interest in, do you remember the point? Every post-colonial society, well, British colonial, they moved the capital city. So Canada, the former capital, they moved it to Ottawa instead. Australia done it with Canberra, and then South Africa with Pretoria. We're the only ones who didn't. We basically said, oh yeah, we know ye were in charge, so you might as well stay in charge. So like all these British operatives, they just became Irish operatives. And it wasn't that they said...
Dublin Castle, the same civil servants. Yep.
Yeah.
Well, that's a weird feeling about Dublin. You know, when you actually go around it, you feel that it's, there's all these communities in Dublin, and they're like little villages stuck together. And it is a very rich human city. But the actual infrastructure, the official parts of it, are actually toxic. And they're actually mainly run by cultures now, I have to admit. Like people who come in, from the countryside, and run the political systems and all that. And that has made it an extraordinarily hostile city. I mean, the thing is that the ordinary people of Ireland, and I'm including myself in that, don't feel that Dublin is their capital, really.
No, I never felt that. I grew up in the north. Well, you see what's going on in Shangan and Ballymun at the moment. They're the future. They're trying to move. I grew up in Shangan and Ballymun, and they're trying to move a Roma family into a house. Someone got wind of it, and basically it's like something from. The locals have banded together to form like a militia to make sure. And they wrote Irish only. And, and they were saying things, it's not because they're foreigners, it's because they were moved out of a middle class area for causing antisocial issues, and they were moved into Shangaan. Now, Shangaan and Ballymun is like, it'd be like a village in the west of Ireland. The people there would go back generations and generations. It's just an urban version of that. And I think, this Ballymun, Finglas, these kind of old areas, and around the other cities and like parts of Limerick and stuff, I think you will actually see trouble.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I don't mean anti-immigrant riots. I mean they'll actually go looking for. They might actually, like I can tell you from Ballymun, that they'll actually go looking for the politicians, and they'll go looking for the civil servants and even the journalists. And these people who come pontificate, about like, you're a bunch of racists. Now here's your money for a pride flag. They're going to go for them. They're not going to go for. I mean, they're aware of who put them in this predicament, and it's not the immigrants. It's the system.
But in addition to that, Thomas, and I've seen this an uptick in this in recent times as well of videos where you see Africans, etc., basically telling the Irish people what the score is, and telling them, now you'll have to forget all about your sense of your country and your
They're told
ethnicity.
to say that, I'm sure of it.
They're being taught, they're coached to say that.
Because they want the authorities and the establishment want race riots, because that proves that the working class in particular are all a bunch of racists. That proves that to them. But also it allows them to bring in draconian laws. If we could in any way educate these communities that are on the boiling point, don't make the mistake like they made in England with the National Front and stuff like that. Don't go after the immigrants. Go after the system. Go down and protest and take over off government buildings and stuff like that. And I think if we could get that message out, that the enemy is really the system.
Well, there's only approximately 50 to 60 people in the country who are of capacity where they're actually doing it. And this is what I've tried to point out, that I'll probably be incarcerated for it. There's not that many who are in power of bringing them in and keeping them here. It's a very small amount of men, and predominantly men. A targeted operation, in my opinion, could be very successful. Ireland is ridiculously open to change.
Yes.
It's terminally close to change. It's just literally if en masse people could think, actually, you just pinpoint these 50 to 60 individuals and that changes everything.
But I think a critical thing, and just to add to what Thomas said there, or an appendage to that, is that, infiltration of protests has been a huge factor.
Yes.
Where the whole tenor of them has been altered into a way that suits the establishment and suits the cops, because they can batter these down. So, there's always a couple of guys who'll start a ruck and start throwing bottles or whatever. It seems to me that there was a failure from an early stage in the lockdown protests to put a stamp on the protests which would be of a particular kind. Like if you look at the way that the most successful revolution, peaceful revolution in history probably, was the Velvet Revolution in Prague in 1989. And to look at the way that was orchestrated, it was orchestrated actually around a network of theatres and along the logic of theatre. So that instead of actually shouting and roaring and shaking your fist at the powerful, people were walking in silent protest. They were singing. They were rattling their keys was a big one. Who asks not for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee, communists, and that it was a hugely powerful thing. And you can see, if you look at, there's some clips of the video on YouTube of that. It's quite a powerful thing.
It's not going to happen now. Not going to happen here, because we're in a different world. What we're going to have, I think, is just absolute fragmentation. I just think you're going to have people breaking off into different groups.
Unfortunately,
it's not going to be a great rising to go down to the Leinster House and get the Dáil or get the British Parliament fixed or get the. It's not going to be.
But what I'm saying, Jim, Thomas, is that there was an opportunity to set a stamp on it from the start.
But it was a different world then.
it wasn't. It was, yeah, I guess so. But maybe we wouldn't have got to where we are now if a different approach had been taken.
But you see, ultimately, as far as what I think is going to end up in, is clan culture once again. I think this Western democracy kind of imperialistic thing that we have falls under its own weight. I think those who can hold certain areas to themselves will do fine. But I wouldn't like being in Dublin or one of the larger cities.
No, definitely
I think whatever chance you have as a rural community of holding your little patch.
And if you live in a large urban area, start building a network now. Start finding who's your friend and who you can depend on.
Well,
that would be your number one priority.
And also in rural areas, I mean, it's important. Like if you live in a sprawling area with only a few houses in it, you need to have your act together in terms of knowing where the vulnerabilities are, for people coming in, and have patrols and all the rest of it organised, because that's what it's going to come to.
Yes, eventually. And the trouble with this whole Iran thing is it could be a lot quicker than people realise.
I think it's honest, because the money systems are running out of road now. They planned a smooth landing from COVID. It's not going to be smooth now. They've missed their opportunity. They've gone on to. They played it too long. I think they could have, but they weren't ready. They hadn't the alternative system in place.
But it all has to die now, everything. I mean, this is what Epstein Files is. This is what's happening in Persia. It's what's happening here with all. I think it all has to die. I think when it overstays its welcome in terms of what it can do for human beings, it has to be destroyed. And it does that itself organically. It does that itself.
But here I come back to the fundamental thing, that most of the population are blindsided as to the meaning of all of these events. They don't understand them on the terms that we are talking here.
I know, but they will when there's a fire under their arse. It's like Irish people are very good at one thing, responding to shock. They'll ignore it. They go, sure, Jesus, don't worry about it. Yeah. But when I've noticed, if you look through the history of Ireland, and even seeing Irish communities abroad, when something goes wrong, we do have the remarkable capacity as a people to say, okay, the procrastination is over.
Yeah.
We got to get our shit together now. I've seen that over and over again with Irish people.
It's trigger points, because when one thinks of it logically.
But we need a bomb under our bone to actually do it. That's the problem.
Well, the bomb you're about to have is in the next couple of weeks. People aren't going to be able to afford anything. So if you go back to, the 1916, when they tied Connolly to the chair, that's what people couldn't cope with. They went, you tied someone to a chair and shot them. And then you take...
literally in 24 hours.
And then Bloody Sunday. Yeah. Another occasion. What? You shot people at a civil protest? Well, now we're all in.
Yeah.
So over the next couple of weeks, I feel that everyone is going to be no money. I have no money. And one foreigner is going to F up. Yeah. And that's where it all goes wrong. So I've lost my job, I've lost everything, I can't pay for anything, and those people that you told me were perfectly safe have done this.
Yes.
And that's your inflection point.
Well, let's see what happens next. But I do think, one of the things that I wanted to do in starting this channel was to try to build something, not necessarily that would become the thing, but would perhaps show a way of doing it, that we could take on the mainstream media and eventually that will actually gain the traction to replace it, because that's the vital thing that's missing. I think that, we're having this discussion among ourselves. Most people that out there in Ireland, for example, would watch this and be mystified by as to what we're talking about. They don't know. They have a hint of it, they have a feeling about it, they know there's something wrong, but this would be all. And they would actually have to go around, however they have to go to kind of find the resources to begin to understand the complexity of what we're talking about, because we've been talking about it now for 6 years, and it's changed a lot in that time. So that's my hope for this channel. I hope that we'll be back again very soon with another live show. Thank you all for your support and Patreon and all that stuff, we're grateful for all of that. It keeps us going, it keeps the lights on, and you can see they're working at the moment. So keep going, and thank you all very much for watching, and thanks all my guests, and we'll see you all again, I hope, before too long. Good night or good day, depending on where you are.